without further ado, let me introduce my new friend, Stan Parish. He's the former editor-in-chief of The Future of Everything at the Wall Street Journal. He's going to talk about that sort of uncanny transition into novel writing. He's the author of the novels Love and Theft, which was published with Doubleday, and Down the Shore, which was published with Viking in 2014. His writing has appeared in GQ, Esquire, Surface, New Jersey Monthly, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times Magazine. And one of my favorite facts about Stan is he holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and he lives in Rome. So he's really living that, that dream bohemian lifestyle, but, it's not all been fantasy, as he's going to get into the grit and the reality of being a novelist as well. So Stan, I'm going to kick this off and we're going to start talking.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to see you.
Wonderful. So can you, now with that bio that we've given, can you tell us a bit about your career before writing books, and specifically how you knew when it was you were ready to take the risk and pursue your passion of novel writing?
So I had kind of a winding path to get here. I graduated from Wesleyan University and did a very brief stint in finance. I was working for an impact-focused investment fund for about 5 minutes before I realized that was not at all what I wanted to do. And I'd had an offer before that of an internship at Vanity Fair where I went next. And from there, I was hired as the assistant to the editor-in-chief at GQ. And so I did this was the kind of the Devil Wears Prada era of Condé Nast. So that was sort of a very high pressure and high intensity job, but I learned a lot about writing and editing while I was there. And while I was there, I, excuse me, I signed with my current agent and published my first novel. And at that point, I kind of knew that leaving and writing novels was what I wanted to be doing and what I should be doing, but it took me a long time to actually get to that point. So from there, I went to Departures magazine as a senior features editor. I was the deputy editor of Bloomberg Pursuits, which was Bloomberg's luxury quarterly magazine. And after Bloomberg Pursuits kind of folded as a magazine, I decided this is it. This is the moment that I'm just going to write novels. I took a very brief freelance stint at the Wall Street Journal to be editor-in-chief of a one-off magazine that they were going to do called The Future of Everything. And I was basically going to take that check, finish this novel. My agent was sort of breathing down my neck about when I would be done with it, but I had no time at that point. So I left the Wall Street Journal after doing that one-off project. That one-off project then turned into a giant multinational media brand, and I got sort of sucked into running it, which took up another 5 years of my life. But it was funny, so I had left at the point that I finished the magazine. I left and went to Esquire to do another very brief stint. And one day during my time at Esquire, the editor-in-chief came up to my desk and said, you're going back to the Wall Street Journal? And I said, no. I got nervous and thought, is there something that I'm unaware of? Did I sign a contract and forget about it? And I was pretty sure that I hadn't. But then he told me to look at Women's Wear Daily at an article about me, which I was also completely unaware of. And it was the head of advertising at the Wall Street Journal announcing that The Future of Everything had been such a big success. They were going to turn it into a podcast and a video series and live events, and that I was coming on as the editor-in-chief. No one had told me that. So I called the Wall Street Journal, and of course my boss picked up right away and was like, I know, I'm sorry. That was supposed to happen next week, not this week. And so at that point I was in sort of a great bargaining position because they'd already hired me publicly without having a contract. So I said, look, I'll totally come back and run this, but this is what it's going to cost you, basically, which they agreed to. And then I ran that for 5 years while working on a thriller, which is what I had sort of always wanted to do. And the thriller sold, and at that point, I had sort of a hard break and sort of a spiritual crisis, and left the journal to pursue that full time, which kind of brings us up to the present day.
Right. So you, we don't need to reveal her name, but you're with one of the best fiction agents in the business. And I think, that's wonderful in of itself. I know you met at a cocktail party. Not every writer is so lucky to have that access, but what was it that connected you two, made her take the chance on you?
I was really fortunate to study with Alexander Chi at Wesleyan, who is still one of my favorite writers. I actually went to Wesleyan because I'd read his book. I was sort of looking to transfer out of St. Andrews University in Scotland, which is where I did my freshman year after Lawrenceville, our high school alma mater. And I was writing Alex actually left my senior year, but he had read my thesis and shared some thoughts about it with my agent. And I met her at this party. And at the party, embarrassingly, I didn't really know that she was an agent. Didn't really know what was going on. And she just took she took an interest in me, and we had a great conversation. And at that point, Alex explained to me that she was going to be this superstar, and that if she was interested, that I should definitely sign with her. But basically, it was kind of great because I approached the initial conversation not really unknowing who she was or what she did. And I just really liked her as a person. And I think that's been, sort of the foundational and really important aspect of our relationship, is that, I just thought she was really intelligent and kind and thoughtful. And if you're, in publishing, in most cases, you're going to be with your agent longer than your editor, your publicist. That is the relationship that is going to be the longest running and most significant. So you really have to like the person, on that level. You really have to connect to them as a human being.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. And of course, you're asking me questions later, and I totally agree with you about the importance of chemistry and how much that means, and trust.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful in ways, because you didn't know her. You were doing the dog and pony show. If I have a novel and pitching it, you're speaking to another important point where we say, like, if you can get any access in, any referral, it means so much, right? Like if a client sends me a referral, I'm looking at that first thing before I'm looking at the queries that have come my way. So just in terms of talking about the craft for a moment, Jamie was sharing some of hers, Phil was sharing some of, his process. What do you think? I know it's a tough question, different for everyone, but what do you think are the key components to writing a successful novel, especially in this genre? And do you have a particular process or routine that our writers can learn from?
Yes. I'm hoping that you can all actually learn from my initial mistake, which is that with Love and Theft, I actually didn't totally know where it was going to end. And the book sold, and I decided that I was unhappy with the ending and moved the publication date in order to get it right. Which, as you can imagine, caused a lot of drama. It actually ended up working out really well. And again, this is another important thing about having a great agent and someone who really believes in you and trusts you, is, she was sort of interfacing with my publisher at that point and saying, like, if you like the first version, you're going to love, what he's doing with it now. I didn't even really know what I was doing with it at that point. But, eventually I got it right. But I cannot stress in this genre the importance of outlining and understanding where you're trying to go. I definitely wrote my first novel without a real sense of that, sort of following the Neil Gaiman teaching of, driving in a car in the rain where you can see, you can only see a few feet ahead of you, but that's enough to get where you're going. That in genre fiction, I don't think works very well. The book I'm writing now, I actually wrote the ending first, essentially, and I know exactly where it's leading. And with a book where with a thriller or with a mystery or anything where you're trying to constantly build tension, it really helps to know exactly where you're going and to have a pretty clear outline so that you can do things along the way, like be in a scene and create moments in that scene that, based on a reveal or based on new information, are going to read completely differently. And if you don't do that, if you then have to go back and reverse engineer the entire book, which is an incredible amount of work, as I learned from writing Love and Theft. So for me right now, I would say I'm doing a lot of screenwriting now, and I've learned a lot about outlining from screenwriting. But if you're writing, I would say, any type of genre fiction, that the understanding of where you're headed and how you're going to get there is really important. Even if you don't keep and adhere to a strict outline, however you want to do that, knowing and understanding that from the beginning is really, really helpful.
Yeah. So this is something that Phil and Jamie may know, and Jeff, but the manuscript has to be full, complete, and fairly baked in order. Now, I know you sold this back in okay. So 2014, still a different day and age in publishing in 2014 than it is in 2021. And I think editors are getting even more sort of picky about having something that feels like you could just put a jacket on it and put it on shelves with some degree of editing. The manuscript really has to be in that place. Back in the days of some of our, New York Times bestselling fiction authors, you could actually send like 15 pages of their next book or even their first book to say, and a publisher would spend 6 figures on it based on that. Not the case anymore. It's got to be a full manuscript. Sometimes there's got to be some marketing information to support that as well. The title's got to be a slam dunk. There are all of these components, the biography of the author that publishers today are looking for to be really dialed in.
Oh yeah, and just to be totally clear, when I sold Love and Theft, everyone was completely happy with the ending. I had this moment where I read it after it was sold and realized that it could be better. It sold in 12 countries initially by the time that I decided to completely rip up the last third and redo it. Yeah. But the way that it sold, everyone was ready to put a jacket on it and run with it. It was just my own my own neuroses that made me want to rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah. So I know from our friendship that you have a burning passion to do this day and night. But do you do this day and night? I mean, do you have hours in the day dedicated to this? Do you take a day off? What's the routine there, if any?
I just took 4 days off for the first time in 2 years, which felt great. But I worked very high intensity corporate jobs for a long time. So I was working long hours in the office. And, I would say I definitely approach this differently in terms of, feeling out my schedule day to day, but I write almost every day, including the weekends. Like I don't really take days off because it's funny. I was sort of used to writing in my off hours. So my work time is basically any time that I feel like it. And it feels great to have the freedom to work, whenever I feel inspired to. But, no matter whether I'm feeling it or not, I sit down to write at some point every day. And that looks, and, sometimes some days the work is research. Some days it's watching TV shows that could be relevant. I just read every single book written by a female employee of the FBI that I could find. So I'd spent a lot of time researching this character. And, there were days early on in the process when I was reading and taking notes 8 hours a day. But yeah, I mean, I really knew that it was time to leave my day job when I was spending every single minute of my free time doing this, and not sleeping a whole lot. That was sort of the sign that maybe it was time to, take the leap and move into this section of my career.
Great. Tell us, I know we do want to talk about the book to film process, because that's always really exciting for writers, but the process once you signed, or even going back to like what that submission process was to your knowledge, and you're on pins and needles waiting to hear from people, and then you get the book deal, and then the publishing experience. Can you speak a little to that? And I know you have 2 different publishers, so maybe different answers. But yeah, tell us the sort of highlights or miseries of those book deals.
Let's see, my first book, the editing process went very smoothly. I had a great editor at Viking who I worked very well with and who I just liked a lot personally. And that process went very smoothly and sort of according to plan. The miseries of my second novel were all self-inflicted. It was me deciding that the book could be much better than it was, which no one else agreed with. So it was that was kind of a high drama moment, but it was nice that ultimately when I turned in what I considered to be the finished manuscript, the reaction was, okay, you were right. This is a much better book. And in terms of the book to film stuff, I was sort of unfamiliar with it until my second novel, but I got very lucky and got a great review from the New York Times book review, which we sort of did the submission on the strength of that. And when Love and Theft sold, there was a bunch of sort of initial film interest because the editor who bought it is the editor who did the Da Vinci Code. So when he buys something, there's a lot of film agents are curious to see what it is. And I was in this awkward position of taking meetings with sort of A and B list actors who were interested in these parts when I knew that if I couldn't get this book right, I was going to kill it. So essentially, I was either going to get the book to a place that I was happy with it, or I wasn't going to publish it at all. So, I was, sitting in the Soho House. I mean, I won't name any names, but, sort of nodding and smiling and being like, yeah, great. I'm so flattered that you're interested in this. I would love to see you in the movie version of this book, but there's a chance, and this is just me in my own head, that I'm going to kill this thing and it's never going to see the light of day. So that was kind of an interesting and awkward moment, which only happened with the second book. But the book to film process so far has been very smooth. It's been optioned by Universal and Will Packer Productions, and we have a writer attached. And I was thrilled with his pitch for the screenplay, which I declined to write because I felt like I was a little too close to the story. But yeah, so far so good.
Stan, you really sound like an agent and an editor's dream with all of that shifting around. But I actually mean that in the most affectionate way, because I've found that our most successful authors have a really strong vision. And that can change. But what's important is that they're not just accepting what an agent or a publisher or a producer says. They're really like staying close to what their intuition tells them about their art. So I think that's an important part of why you're successful. Are there regrets or things writers should know about working with a publisher or the publishing process generally?
I would say I don't have any regrets. I'm very sort of lucky that everything panned out the way that it did, given the the delay that I caused. But I would say your agent or your editor is sort of the second most important relationship beyond your agent, because in all likelihood, if you're fortunate, you'll probably change houses a couple of times. But finding those initial conversations with editors who were interested in my books after the submissions just told me so much in the way that they were reacting to it. And I could tell very quickly whether our sort of vision for it aligned. It was very informative to hear the things that they really liked. And if those were things that I was really proud of in the book, that was great. But there were also when they had questions, and those questions aligned with things that I had been sort of secretly wondering about and unable to solve on my own. That's how I kind of zeroed in and said, okay, these 2 or 3 people are the people who I think really understand where I'm going. And that is hugely important. You want to make sure that your vision is as closely aligned with your editor's vision for the book as possible. And that hopefully they're bringing things to the table. There was editors who asked me questions that I hadn't thought of, and that was really thrilling for me, because I was like, that if I really put it under a microscope and fix it, will absolutely make this a better book. And, writing a novel or writing anything is such a solo act for 99% of the process is you locked in, your hotel room, your office. That collaborative aspect is really thrilling to me. And, a big part of it for most people, for me certainly, is with my agent. She's my first reader, one of my best editors, certainly. And then, you obviously, if you're fortunate enough to land it with a publishing house that you like, you're going to spend a long time going back and forth with that person, hopefully. And you want to make sure that your visions sort of match up as much as possible.
Yeah. I mean, what's been wonderfully surprising over the years for us is that we've seen some of our most ambitious authors turn down bigger deals, more money, because the editor meeting that they had with the lesser bidder was tough. The lesser bidder had a vision for a book and said, you're going to have to change this and that, and like kick the tires of the proposal. And then, to my great surprise, these authors chose that person because the other was just sort of, blindly excited about the book just as it came. So, I really admire that. Again, it's that instinct to go with the person who shares your vision.
Absolutely. That's, so important. And, that's really about thinking long-term. If you run the numbers on what the book will do for your career, if it's successful, you want the best version of that book, even if it means taking less money up front. The math on that for me was always kind of simple. It's like, you have to take the long view. My agent has said from the very beginning, we started working together as soon as I was out of college. And one of the first things she said to me is that this is a long game. And you want to be, and you really need to make every decision on sort of like a 10, 15, 20-year timeline. Don't think about today.
Yeah. That's such a good point generally in work as in life. But the other point is like, you want to become a house favorite author. So as a novelist, but even my nonfiction authors, like those that want to do a book a year or a book every 2 years and see their careers as their full-time authors, it's so important to like keep that energy and enthusiasm for you and not suck it out of the room. Because as certain books do better than others, right? Like that, the next acquisition hinges in part on the success of your last book or your sales track. So if you're this author that everyone loves, people can overlook track a little bit for that reason. So really important to like have your champions always be championing you and not abuse that privilege in a way. Yeah. So I have the sense that you're a house favorite. I want to let people ask questions in a minute, but one more for me is if you could narrow in on one thing that you would encourage aspiring novelists to do, what would it be? Feel free to say 3 things.
I would say the discipline of working when you feel stuck or blocked or whatever it is that prevents you from writing or whatever your avoidant practices are, finding a way to overcome that. And I've seen very different things work for very different people, but sometimes it's just free writing, and other times it's reading and research. I would say whatever it takes to sort of get you in the chair, finding a way to do that even when you absolutely do not feel like doing it. When I was really struggling to finish my last book, at one point I got really, really sick. I was running like a really high fever. And I just thought, like what the absolute last thing I want to do, I was like delirious with fever basically. And the last thing in the world I wanted to do was face the ending of this book, which was at that point had become this like complete nightmare to me and something that I was not sure that I was ever going to finish. And it's funny, I was reading a lot of Buddhist texts at that point, and there's this great line in a very famous Buddhist text where a teacher tells their student to go into the hottest part of the fire if they want to end their suffering. And so I thought, you know what, the last thing I want to do is open my laptop and face this thing that I have no idea, that I feel completely unequal to at this point. And I just sat down and started writing, and I ended up working for about 12 hours straight. And that's when I got the ending to the book. And it made me realize that like actually the times when I'm really avoiding writing, when I don't feel like doing it, if you can get over what turns out to be kind of a small hump, there's usually something pretty powerful behind that. And, I've shared that with, when I was an editor, I would tell that to writers that I was working with. If you're avoiding it, there may be a reason you're avoiding it, and sort of an internal reason that there's something that you're afraid to face. And if you can deal with that, if you can get over that sort of initial block, there's often pretty powerful stuff to be done behind that. So I would say if there's one piece of advice that I give to anyone who comes to me and asks, how to do this, is learn how to do it when you don't feel like it, because most of the time you won't feel like it. And often that could lead to really good work.
I like that. Again, as work as in life. I want to let those attending today ask any questions of you before you get to ask me questions. Yes, Phil.
Well, thanks so much for the insights you've shared. All really, really brilliant stuff and incredibly helpful. One thing I'm curious about is, and something that seems to shift, that seems to shift considerably from one publishing agency to the next, is how engaged they get in marketing. And I'm wondering what role you played in that and what the options are out there. Because I know in sort of discussing this issue with Alka Joshi, who I mentioned earlier, is that she got very involved in the marketing. They did a terrific job on their end, but she also got very involved. And I think it was really her marketing that really sort of was responsible for pushing it as far as it went.
I mean, I would say my rule is always be available for whatever you can and help out in any, in any way that you can. I did all kinds of Q&As and Instagram lives and talks and discussions at libraries. basically say no to nothing, no matter how small or insignificant the audience seems, because you never know who you're going to connect with, how you're going to connect with that person. I had made some friends in sort of the Bookstagram community that turned out to be really helpful in promoting the book, and just found people who really connected with it. And that for me was a really amazing way to meet and connect directly with readers, and also with people, very influential Bookstagrammers with very large followings. And a lot of that was just basically answering DMs and being willing to talk to people and do Instagram lives with them. And it was a great, that community didn't exist when my first book was published, and by the time my second book came out, it was sort of huge. And it was just a good example of the ways that sort of these small interactions can play a really big role in getting the word out about your book, just through people who really connect with it personally, and then have a chance to connect with you personally too.
Great. Good. Thank you.
Jamie, anything to ask?
Gosh, I normally have so much to say. I'm kind of at a loss for words today. Not really like a question. I just think, one of the things that I'm hearing from what you're sharing is all of your experiences in writing before really prepared you to be a novelist and deal with pressure and trust yourself about, I don't know where this ending is supposed to go, but I know this isn't right. And so I think that, it's always, you really do get to draw on everything from your life to help you be a good writer if you're willing to do it. And then I like what you were talking about, just write every day. It reminded me, I watched Walter Mosley's masterclass, and he says he writes 1,000 words a day. They don't have to be good, but he just sits down and writes 1,000 words a day. And there was something to me that was so refreshing about the idea of they don't have to be good, because I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves. And it's really more just, I think, allowing yourself the space to enjoy the process of creation, whether it's something that's going to go in the trash can or not, doesn't really matter. It's just opening yourself up to that that's really important. And like you said too, that's when the ideas come to you, is a lot of times when you least expect it. I like to walk personally. And I was talking to somebody last night at the bar downstairs. She does SEO. She's like a big company for SEO, but she works with a lot of writers. And I was like, for me, I don't sit down to a blank page. If I don't know what I want to write on some level, I don't sit down to a blank page. To me, that's just a recipe for disaster. I'll read, I'll watch a movie in the genre, I'll go for a hike, I'll meet with another creative and talk to them about what they're doing. But I try not to sit down to a blank page, because I just think that you're just asking for writer's block by doing that. So I think, but also not being afraid to write 1,000 terrible words is absolutely a wonderful freedom to have too as a writer. So I appreciate you saying that you write every day, no matter whether you feel about it or not.
So Jamie, you think of this tool called Scrivener, which I haven't used, but I know writers of ours swear by, which allows you to sort of like, if you want to hit chapter 8 versus look at chapter 1 looming at you, you can just start writing there.
Yeah. Oh, that's yeah.
You're familiar with the tool?
No, I've never. No.
Yeah, it just sounds great. If I think of being in the shoes of a writer and just looking at that blank page, but you have an idea for the ending or for the middle, and you can just get started there. It's worth looking at.
Not being afraid to not be linear, right? I mean, we're artists. Are we supposed to be linear all the time?
Yeah, exactly.
I would actually take that Walter Mosley maxim a step further. Like I've heard people, they're like, they might not be good. I would take that a big step further. They're not going to be good. Like the 1,000 words that you put down are going to probably be shit. And you're like, there's no way you're going to end up publishing that. I don't think I've ever published a sentence unchanged from, the first thing I put down. So it's almost like, I feel like people are setting sort of a false expectation. They're like, well, they might be bad. No. They are absolutely going to be bad. And you have to get over, the notion that it's going to be anything but bad, basically. And that if you can really get over it, is very freeing. You just allow yourself to do it in your own personal space. No one's ever going to see it. Hopefully, no one ever sees my first drafts. But yeah, there is something really freeing about that, I think.
Yeah, and you're like, again, your background as a writer, and obviously like in a different industry in a different way, still helped you to understand that the first draft is the first draft. It's just the jumping off point, and that you don't have to put a lot of weight and expectation on it. It's more the beginning of a journey that you're taking. And I think probably even though smaller works helped you understand that and be more comfortable when you decided to jump into novel writing. I'm imagining.
Oh, I mean, working in magazines in this way was helpful because I worked in some cases with Pulitzer Prize winners, National Magazine Award winners who sent me what they considered finished drafts, and they were awful. And I was like, okay, and I was at that point, I was a very young editor, in my early 20s, and I was like sort of eagerly awaiting these drafts of stories that I was going to work on for the first time with these writers I really admired. And what they sent me was terrible. And I thought, am I crazy, or is this really bad? And the answer was no, it was really bad. And it sort of let me see the person behind the curtain a little bit and realize that, like, even these people whose finished products I really admired, their early versions of that work sucked. And that was very liberating and sort of inspiring for me to see that, like the garbage draft that I had sitting on my hard drive could someday turn into something that I was really proud of, which at 22, I didn't really understand.
I'm sorry. So you think it's then more the idea of the story than the actual story in the beginning, like that gets people interested or want to be helpful, is not that the car is built, but they like the design of the car on the paper and they want to help you build it, would you say?
No, I mean, I don't show anything to anyone until I don't feel like I can take it any further. But it was just funny to see that not everyone agrees with that.
I'm nodding my head and he's shaking it. So that's the author agent, and obviously, Stan's a kind of author who needs things to be at a level of perfection, which I really admire. But I would say for pitching purposes, the design is more important than the car mechanics for us. Because we know that if we want to be involved editors and partners with you, that we can get there if the raw talent is there and the idea is there.
Yeah, I didn't show anybody this novel until I finished draft 3, and I feel like I've done everything I can do. Now I need to give it away and see if the places that I don't feel are exactly right, other people trigger on, or what the feedback is. And that was really helpful. And it's so great when you get to give it away and you start to get that feedback back and you're like, yes, I knew I needed to look at that again. But you just, you do need at a certain point other people's input, and hopefully, you're, like you said, you have a clear enough vision that the things, what do they say in the movies, kill your darlings? When you're editing, you have to be able to leave your favorite scene on the floor if it doesn't help push the story along. So having other people help you kill your darlings sometimes is good, I think.
Yeah.
Stan, I'm going to let you, because we've got about 10 plus minutes before we ask more questions. Ask those questions that most appeal. We're probably not going to have time for them all. So those that you find most compelling and you think will be most compelling to writers listening.
I mean, I'm sort of curious. I know you guys do mostly nonfiction, so I'm curious in sort of what you look for in fiction and how you handle those relationships and the balance between fiction and nonfiction on your list.
Well, thanks for asking. So we look for you, of course, but with that kind of like rigor. So you're right. Our agency really is known for practical nonfiction. But we all came into this business, as most people in publishing, as fiction lovers, literary fiction lovers, aspiring creative writers. And so I think that all of us have a soft spot for novels. They're just so damn hard to sell. Again, in this marketplace and for debut. So I would say that it has to be incredibly special to strike our attention. Many of them come via referral. Every now and then we do catch a gem as a blind query. And like any project we sign, I mean, I'm a lover of artists. Like I have to fall in love with the person as well as the product, sometimes first. It is about that chemistry. It's about whether that project is a fit for our interests, our brand, and our relationships. But when we get on the phone, we're not going to sign something without meeting you, right? And when we get on the phone with you, we need to know that we're going to work together because this is a lifetime marriage if it works out correctly. And, you know, because we have at Lucinda Literary, we have over a decade of experience as an agency. Our contacts, our name, we're based here in New York, you know, are really solid at this point. So whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you know, we can make a call, we can send an email, and we'll get really quick reads and reactions. So it hasn't been a disadvantage to us in selling fiction projects that were mainly known for nonfiction. And then to answer just the two-part question in terms of what specifically we look for in novels, and of course this is unique to me, and Lauren here may have a different perspective, it has to have characters I can root for or love to hate, as is more the trend today. Some aspect that transports me to another world, feels relatable in theme or emotion while also teaching me something new. Timeliness is critically important. So for instance, right now the trend is really on underrepresented voices and stories, and that's sort of, it's not critical for every book and you can't really force it, but if there is that dimension, you've now sort of upped your sales potential, just to be, you know, completely frank about it. And just as in nonfiction, an unknown author trying to break out has to have a clear, there's got to be that raison d'etre, you know, that reason that book is going to be contributing to an existing crowded shelf, which is why I really tell writers to be well read in their categories, to know their comps. There are too many writers who approach me, and they tend to be more on the nonfiction side, that say, I've got this really fresh, brand new idea. Like, sounds like so many things I've heard or read before. Have you read the 3 other people that sound like this? And they haven't. You know, they're not readers. So it's like, how can you be a writer if you're not a reader? Again, less so the case for fiction writers. They're generally very well read across the board, but it is something we find. And then, of course, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Like there's something just very special and magnetic that you can't even qualify or quantify or define. You just know that you are like a moth to the flame for it. And again, I think I touched on this, but I have been a literary fiction lover all my life, certainly in my 20s. And now as I find myself a mother and potentially nearing a midlife crisis, I find I'm gravitating more toward, you know, the Leanne Moriarty, the sort of commercial women's upmarket fiction that keeps the pages turning, Emma Straub, you know, stuff that that maybe I would have had a different feeling about in my 20s, but as I've evolved, my tastes have evolved. And I would also say that the things that we love to read are not the things we love to sell. So never fancied myself a business book reader or science reader, but now I think, wow, there is a strong sort of impulse in the market in the nonfiction world for books like that with the right idea. And so I find myself really loving to advocate for them. Yeah, that's a long answer.
It's a great answer. And sort of speaking of the sort of long-term marriage that you described between you and your clients, I'm curious, like what are, in terms of the sort of healthy long-term marriages, what are the things that you find are the sort of the ingredients for success in your long-term marriages with these writers that you represent?
Right. So you embody one of them, tenacity. Really important, right? Like I'm a hugely tenacious person myself. I want to have that industriousness, tenacity, belief in the project, sort of like come hell or high water, which goes hand in hand with, you have to have a thick skin, right? Writers are in the business of rejection. We haven't even gotten to the Amazon reviews yet, what that's like to have your first really negative Amazon review and how that can be heartbreaking. First, you're in the querying position of getting all of these rejections. Guess what, as an agent, you're getting rejections too, you know, and now you've like spent all of this time and the writer's hopes are up and you're getting rejections. So we all sort of have to have that thick skin to be in this business together. Well read in the category, I think I said, is really important. Networkers and relentless marketers. I do want to talk more about marketing as the next thing, but it's not enough to just like write a book and let a publisher take it on. I think we all know that attending here today. It's like, it's all about you generating the excitement day in, day out. I always say my successful authors like build the mountain every day. They don't build the mountain and wait for you to come. So I think that's a really important quality for writers of any kind. And then the openness, the willingness to improve your craft, the willingness to kill your darlings that you thought were so near and dear to your heart. And then an agent like me, who's sort of notorious for tough love, says, kill that darling, or we're not selling this. And hopefully does it I'm sure Lauren would do it in a much more gentle, delicate way than that. But, has it's a collaborative process, right? So if you're too sort of stuck to your initial vision, it just doesn't work and you're not going to be able to evolve. So those are some of the qualities we look for in the author himself or herself.
And so in terms of, I'm curious how you handled sort of lesser known fiction or nonfiction writers. How do you advise people who come to you asking to sort of how to build their tribe and get the word out there about their work?
So the good news is that for fiction, it is not the same climb as nonfiction. Again, being like so much on the page, they need to excel, they need to impress, it's about that. So a complete unknown could write a beautiful winning best-selling novel. And that is like the great and encouraging message for novelists who are listening today. However, it definitely helps to have some marketing under your belt, whether you're savvy in that, whether you learn that. It's the first thing you can do in our virtual world is get active online. So agents in fiction do look to writing credentials in your query letter, meaning like Stan, obviously you had a position as an editor. So an agent is immediately thinking, oh, worked at the Wall Street Journal, worked at Bloomberg, like some third party I know has endorsed this person's ability, and that's important. The ever coveted Iowa Writers Workshop MFA, the literary awards that maybe you've already garnered before you're pitching agents. If you don't have those things, you find something else. So it's maybe, and Phil, you spoke to this, working under maybe it's working under a mentor, being edited by a professional of some name. Someone is willing to promote you on social media or give you a blurb for your book. That sort of shepherding can really strike an agent's attention. The getting online for fiction writers, you mentioned Instagram. I think it's a fantastic tool. We've been, like by hook or crook, trying to get ourselves more present on Instagram. But what I mean by getting active online, if you don't take to Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, is really to just get published somewhere, be able to point to what your voice looks like, you're writing on the page beyond the actual manuscript. Because as I always say, the first thing an editor is going to do when receiving a submission is Google you, and you want to be visible in some way. So I really think that trying to get published, especially in a vertical that aligns to your topic and your audience, can be really helpful for writers of any kind. And the other thing that's sort of nice is, unlike I worked with Gretchen Rubin of the Happiness Project, we came to this place where it was, do I have to talk about happiness day in and day out and every year and in every book? And so it's like the one hit, wonder musician. They don't want to be doing the same thing over and over again, because we're creatives and we're innovative people. So the problem with nonfiction is your audience keeps wanting you to do that one hit thing that works so successfully. With fiction writers, they want to see you depart, do different things, and they want to follow you on that journey. In your social media presence, you really can be voice above all. It's like show yourself as raw, as authentic, as humorous, as wry, as charming. You don't have to just be on your soapbox sort of messaging to people all the time. It's about your voice. So again, I feel very encouraged by the landscape for fiction writers in terms of building their platforms. I think there's just, hopefully I've touched on all the different ways to do that aren't obvious and well known, but just sort of have belief in your own voice, finding an audience.
Yeah, which is not always the easiest thing to do. And so I think sustaining that belief, even in, the face of things not going the way that you want them to go, is incredibly important.
Yeah, exactly. And that sort of like that first backlash you get publicly, which I'm sure you've gotten a negative Amazon review in your life. Like, did it feel crushing to you, or that first rejection from a publisher, or?
I mean, to be honest, it helped me to work in publishing sort of before I started publishing books, because you really come to understand from being, especially like in ideas meetings at big magazines, that, you know, every opinion is just that. It's one person's opinion, and you can control what is on the page. You cannot control the reception of what is on the page. You're never going to be able to control all the variables to make everyone like everything you do, and nor should you. To be honest, like, I actually take a little bit of perverse pleasure in negative Amazon reviews, because I don't want my work to be liked by everyone. I think, you know, love is closer to hatred than indifference, I would say. And if I get someone who's like, I fucking hated this, I'm like, great, that's it. It clearly it wasn't for you. And, you know, I just feel like something that's appealing to too broad a section of the population is probably kind of bland, and that's not the kind of thing that I'm interested in doing. But overall, I mean, it's just you have to sort of relinquish the illusion of control, which makes you believe that by writing something you're going to be able to please everybody. That's never going to happen, and that should never be your goal, I don't think. So, you know, you just have to remember that people's reception of your work has very little to do with you and everything to do with them. And you should, you know, and, you know, there are definitely times when I've gotten a negative review, and I understand their perspective. I don't think they're the reader for me, but like, from their perspective, like, sure, the thing that they're saying is true. I'm glad that it's in the book. I'm sorry that they didn't like it. I'm actually not even that sorry. It's just that's their opinion, and they're welcome to it.
Well, Stan, I could keep asking you questions as you're talking, but Jamie, Phil, do you guys have any closing questions for either of us?
You know, I do have one question for Stan, and that is that are you working on a third novel right now?
Yes, I just sent the first 100 pages to my agent 2 days ago. Yeah, thank you. I'm super excited about it. I had told myself that I wasn't going to write another novel unless I could think of an ending that I had never seen before. Like I wanted a twist that felt new, and it was actually kind of my way. I wanted to mostly transition into screenwriting, which I'm actually in LA right now working on 2 TV shows. But that was sort of my way of getting out of writing another novel, was giving myself what seemed at the time like an impossible task. Like, come on, like a twist that you've never seen before. But it took me about a month, and I thought of something, and I sort of, you know, polled a lot of big people on Bookstagram who read everything, and my agent and various other people, and no one had seen it done quite this way. And I did an initial sort of 30-page, you know, my agent said, send me the first 30 pages so I can make sure that, you know, the voice is right and the tone is right. And that sort of hit the mark. And so I just sent her the first 100. So I'm hoping to finish it by early next year.
Great.
Yeah, it's short. It's short and sweet.
Stan, I have a question for you, but it's on behalf of Jeff, who's also writing a thriller. It's about the plot. So when writing, how do you construct plot? How do you keep it moving forward with a compelling pace, but avoiding seeming contrived? And I actually opened up this question to all our writers here.
How to keep something moving without making it seem contrived. The thing that I found when I was working on Love and Theft, there were these sections that I was sort of had in an outline, and that I was kind of dreading the writing of them. And what I ultimately realized was anything that I was really dreading sitting down to write was something that didn't need to be there in the first place. And so I would say you really, especially in a thriller, you want to focus on the kind of moments that you want to read, and just make sure that you're not boring yourself. And, you know, the stuff that felt really good to me and that felt exciting and dynamic, and, you know, the stuff that I actually enjoyed going back and editing, was the stuff that I really wanted to focus on. And I found a lot of the stuff that I was really avoiding was stuff that had no place in the book. You know, it was, for example, like I had maybe 120-page section of Love and Theft that was mostly backstory, and I ended up cutting almost the entire thing.
Wow.
So, you know, you sort of keep it moving by asking yourself if this is something that would hold your interest as a reader.
Right.
And in terms of plot, I would say try as much as you can with a thriller to know where you're going, because it is so much more work. There's a great, actually, screenwriters actually accidentally often give great advice to novelists. And Tony Gilroy, who I think is the best screenwriter working today, talks about how he would sit down with a co-writer and say, in every scene, we're going to make a side note of who is this character? What do they want? What do they know at this point? What do they not know at this point? And how are we going to get them over the obstacle that this scene is presenting? And one of his co-writers was like, we're going to do this for the main character in every single scene. And he said, no. We're going to do this for every character in every scene, in every draft. And his point, he makes this great point that it's basically like deciding to do that is like quitting smoking. Like the pain of the alternative is so great. You're either like, you avoid, by doing that work in the short term, you avoid so many problems in the long term of getting to the end of the book and realizing that there's a bunch of fluff that doesn't need to be in there and that the plot is not as tight as it could be. So, I mean, really asking yourself those tough questions within every scene will help you structure it, and will make sure that things are as tight as they can be as you're going along.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I want to wrap with just a couple gifts. One, everyone attending is going to receive a copy of Stan's latest book. I hope you enjoy it. And also next week, so our last event of the year on Friday, is our book proposal boot camp. We've actually had fiction and nonfiction writers join this, because we cover marketing, we cover bio, we cover title, a number of things that probably factor into your sales presentation to agents and publishers as well. So Julia will be following up with information about that and a special discount for booking it. And if that isn't for you, I hope you'll join us for more events in the new year, because this is just so much fun for us to do and get to meet you. And Stan, thank you. I can't imagine any more wonderful guest than you to enlighten us today.
Always so great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me, and nice to meet all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good luck with your books.
Thank you. Bye, guys. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.